Hello, guys. Now, this is going to be the last story for this season of stories. And spring's coming here. It's going to get warmer. It's starting to get warmer next week. Snow's going to start melting back. Finally, we had minus 25 degrees Celsius. Now, you guys probably think in Fahrenheit. I used to when I lived down the States. The two temperatures converge at minus 40. So minus 40 Celsius and minus 40 Fahrenheit, they're both the same temperature. So minus 24 is getting probably down around minus 15, minus 20 Fahrenheit. So think minus 15, minus 20 Fahrenheit. That's what it was here the other night, And in the day, it's been like very cold, blistering cold, just the kind of cold you go outside, and when the wind blows, it goes right through you. It doesn't go around you. It goes right through you. That kind of cold. That's what we've had. But anyway, next week's going to warm up because spring does have to come as normal. It always does. It comes around this time of year. And so I noticed today the snow was starting to melt where the sun was hitting it, And so I know it's not going to be long now, and I'll be working on that truck, and I'm going to be doing videos for you guys of the whole process. I'm going to have to take the truck in, and I'm going to have to get a new safety inspection. I'm going to have to let the mechanic go all underneath and take a look at everything. And then I figure what I'm going to do is I might put new tires on it, new brakes. I love to be able to stop. I had a thing years ago where I drove to Florida and my brakes went out on me on the way to Florida. I might do a story about that next season. But anyway, I love to be able to stop, so I'm going to redo the brakes on the truck. It needs a few other little titivatings done mechanically. I'm going to get a new air filter and oil change and a few other things, and a new battery and a few other things for it. But it hasn't got a lot of miles on it, Mechanically, it's a really good old truck. It's only got 90,000 kilometers, which is roughly around, 65,000 miles, which is not much, really, So it should be a really good runner, for what I want it for. And I'm going to put the camper on it. I'm going to attach the camper permanently because this is the end for this truck. It's going to be a camper till the day it dies. I'm going to attach the camper, bolt it down permanently to the truck, not to come off. And what I'm going to do is I'm planning on making a little opening inside the back of the cab that goes into the camper. It's all sealed and everything, so water can't get in and everything. And it's like a passageway, so that I can get into the camper from inside the truck. And I'm going to put a small battery system in it so I have onshore and offshore power. So that I'm going to put a couple deep cell batteries in it. And a little AC converter that'll convert it into 110 volts, so I can run my laptop and my camera equipment and stuff like that. I was thinking about making my first trip not too far from home, probably right up here in Canada. I'll make my first trip or two and do my first couple shows, But then I'm going to start venturing further with it, and after I get it, so I see how it's running. So this is going to be the first season of me on the road this summer. This will be my first season, and then I plan on doing a season next summer too. It'll be season 2, and so anyway, we'll find stuff to get up to in the wintertime when it's snowy outside. We'll find interesting stuff for the channel as well, along with stories maybe in the spring, before I go on my following season. So anyway, I'm going to get into tonight's story. It's about my time down in Florida when I turned basically into a little native, a little savage running around in the woods. When I was really young. Oh man, I couldn't have been much older, maybe 10 or 11 or something like that, years old, And it all started when my dad took me to Orlando. Pop took me to Orlando. And he went to this store where they sold all these sporting goods and everything, right? And they had this little bow there. It was called Little Chieftain, or something like that. It was called Chieftain, I think it was called. It was a little red-colored bow, bow and arrow set. It was a fiberglass bow, and it had like 20, maybe 20, 25 pounds pull strength on the string. You know, it wasn't real strong, but I mean, it was strong enough. 25 pounds is all the Indians had, and they killed buffalo with those things. You know, and it had nice sharp arrows. And he bought me a whole big quiver full of arrows. You know, and he bought me the bow as a present. You know. My dad was good to me, you know, in those years. I mean, he got me a lot of stuff I wanted, you know, as a kid, you know, and that's what I wanted. I wanted that bow and arrow set, you know. But he took it home, and he had a lot of fun with it, too. You know, he started shooting arrows around the yard. Pop did. But he did it on the guise of training me how to do it, you know, so that I could do it safely, you know. He showed me how to pull the string and everything, and how to mount the string on the bow and all that kind of stuff, you know. So it's a little red bow and arrow set, and that's how it got started. Then later, I got a hold of a machete someplace, you know, and I got a hold of a Bowie knife, and my mom bought me a BB gun, you know, an air rifle, and then I bought another air rifle myself with money I saved up. And so I got an air pistol, and I got myself one of those rubber pull slingshots, the ones that have the long rubber pull. They go around your arm, and you can pull it way back, and they're very powerful slingshot, you know. And so I had this slingshot. So that year, what I discovered is I could go into the brush, and I got my machete real sharp, you know, and I would go into the brush, you know, as a kid, like I think I was 11 years old. I go into the brush. And if I pushed on the side of the stalk of these scrub oaks, you know, put a little bit of pressure on it sideways and hit it with my machete, I could cut it off clean with one blow, because they were only about 2 inches around the wood. Like, they weren't real big. I'll tell you how big they were. A lot of them were a little bit bigger than your thumb around. They were about stalks, you know. So I'd cut the stalk, and then I'd push it over into the woods to one side, and I made these paths. And it didn't take me long to make a path, because I was, the way I was cutting them, I was just like making a path through the woods really rather quickly. So I got in this path thing, and on either side of the path, you know, this thick wiry brush, it was almost like a tunnel going through the woods, you know, with all the way up to the top, you know. It was about the wide width a kid could walk, or an adult could walk through it too, but it was about 2 feet wide, you know, this path going through the woods. And it was almost like a tunnel going through the woods, you know, because the woods was so dense and so thick, if you tried to walk through that wiry brush, it would tear at your clothes and scratch you and everything else. But my paths, you know, I made. So every day I'd make like 100 feet or 50 to 100 feet of these paths, and they kept going. I had one path that went all the way down to the lake where the alligators were, and water moccasins and everything else. And in those days, there was alligators around the lakes down in Central Florida, and there was also water moccasins, you know, snakes and everything else. And so I had one path that led down to the lake, and another path and that path must have been 300 or 400 meters long, you know. And then by the time I was done, I had 2 miles of these paths going through the woods, you know. So I was running around in the woods, and I had this bow and arrow, and I had a Bowie knife and a machete, and I had had my pistol, you know, my BB gun pistol, and I had a rifle and everything else. I was well armed for a kid, and I was just constantly shooting, constantly filling that BB gun up, my BB pistol up, and I had rocks, and I had ball bearings in my pocket for the slingshot, and all day long I was just running through the woods shooting at targets. Whatever would move, or whatever would present itself as a target, and trees was targets, everything was targets, you know. And I'd spend about 3 or 4 hours a day. I'd get home from school. Now, the school bus ride, coming all the way in from Eustis. Let's see, what grade was I in? I must have been in 4th grade. So how old would that make me? 4th, maybe 5th grade, something like that. So how old would that make me? About 10 or 11. Yeah, that's right, about 10 or 11. So they'd take me into school in the morning. It was a 30-mile ride to school in the back of this school bus, and we go past all these orange groves on both sides of the highway. And these orange trees back in those days were huge. They must have been 30 or 40 feet tall. Big, branchy trees. They'd grown for years and years. They had thick stumps on them, and for miles, it was just orange groves on both sides of the highway leading into Eustis. For miles there. Beautiful orange groves they used to have along in there. A lot of them, they'd grow things like tangerines and grapefruits, and they had these tangelos and juice oranges. It's one of the favorite things they used to grow in Central Florida was juice oranges. And they had several pulp mills. I always remember the smell of an orange pulp mill when they were milling the orange to make concentrate, And there'd be big steel boilers there and these big pipes going up in the air and be a big plume of steam coming out the top of the pipe, And they were constantly bringing these trucks in full of oranges. And the trucks were so full. Back in those days, when the trucks would go around a corner, if you wanted a bushel of oranges, all you had to do was go to any corner on any state highway, back in those days, and look around on the ditch, and you'd find a whole bushel full of oranges where the truck could go around the corner, he'd be over full, and he'd spill a few. Almost every corner had oranges laying around in the ditch, Perfectly beautiful juice oranges. There's so many of them. And they were hauling them in just steady into the juicer factory where they would cook them down and this big plume of steam would come out the top of the factory. And when you were driving by on the highway and that steam would hit you off of the juicer factory, it was the most lovely smell of these cooking oranges that you ever smelt in your life. I love that smell. I haven't smelled it in years, but I just love that smell that used to come off of those big smokestacks, the steam coming off of the cooking oranges when they were making the concentrate. So they used to bus me into school in the morning, and I'd have like maybe 5 classes. And I'm going to tell you guys, honestly, the classes that they used to give kids are the stupidest curriculum in the world. One of the hour-long classes. And one of the curriculum was history. It's all contrived. It's contrived by the winners. The winners write history, and they write it in their own story. Have you ever honestly seen a couple break up, And so 2 people are together, and a couple breaks up, and the woman will come to you, and she'll tell you the story of what happened. Oh, he did this to me, and oh, he did that to me. And then the guy comes along, and he tells you exactly his opinion of the story, but it's totally different. Well, this is the way they write history. It's written by the victors, and the victors tell it their way. You know what I mean? It's all contrived. So they're making you learn all this contrived stuff in history, and then you go to your next class, social studies. And it's all contrived. And then you go to your next class, which is science class, and they start teaching you about evolution and stuff like that. It's only a theory, but they teach it to you as fact. In those days, they used to teach it as fact, And a lot of the other scientific theories and stuff that they teach in science class are all rubbish. They've all been thrown out now. It's not being true anyway. So I asked the science teacher, and I was only about 11. I asked the science teacher, I said, where does the heat come from in volcanoes? He says, from the textbooks, what they've taught, what we know, and he says, we say that the heat comes in the volcanoes from friction. The Earth's crust moves, he said, and when the Earth's crust moves, it creates friction. He said, rub your hands together. And I rubbed my hands together. He says, does it feel warm? I says, yeah, it makes it warm. He says, that's where the heat from volcanoes comes from. It comes from friction. It's baloney. I mean, they're wasting kids' time. I mean, I'm getting off on a little bit of a tear here, and I'm losing track of my story, but I just got to say it, that they should only have 3 things in school. They should have reading, reading classes, teach them how to read, teach them how to do math and arithmetic and math, and teach them just the basics, the very basics of what they need to survive in life. And only teach them for a very short period of time, but really drill it into them. Have 8 hours a day instead of 6 or 5 hours. Have 8 hours a day and drill it into them over a 3-year period. When they're in those years when they can learn fast, And that should be it. If they want more, they should have to pay for it. Anyway, back to my story. So they bussed me all the way into Eustis, which took about an hour, and they'd bussed me all the way back home through these orange groves and everything. And I had arrived back home roughly around 4 o'clock. So first thing I would do is run in the house and have something to eat, and then run out and run down the trails in the woods with all my apparatus of BB guns and everything else. So I was shooting at everything, shooting at trees, shooting at squirrels. Oh man, I'll tell you, the squirrels, they learned to stay clear of me, I'm telling you. The squirrels up in the trees. They hated me. I was their biggest nemesis. And, the squirrels, they represented the most perfect target for me, But anyway, I got over those years, about a year went by and I was doing that. It was like a phase I was going through. Kids go through phases. And it was a phase I was going through. But during that phase, I got so that I could, after shooting the bow and arrow and shooting the BB pistol so much and shooting the slingshot so much, I got a tremendous ability, like to aim them. Like it stayed with me to this day. Like I can aim something from. I don't have to use the sights. If you shoot enough, like anything, if you're a kid like that and you learn how to do it a certain way, you just pick it up in your hand. Like you get so that you can. Like even now, like I could pick up a bow and arrow and I could hit a target like at maybe 150 feet with no problems at all, a small little target and stuff. Because it's just when I was a kid, I just shot these things so much, Anyway, so I really enjoyed my time, and guess what I did? Went down to the lake, down my trail, and I actually I caught an alligator when I was a kid. I caught an alligator. He was getting up close to the house. He was like leaving the lake and he was starting to walk up toward the house, and he was getting up fairly close to the house. But he wasn't a real big alligator. He was 6 feet long. And I caught him and grabbed him by the tail. And he was hissing and everything else, swinging his head around and everything else. I stayed away from those teeth. I kept pulling him by the tail, and I lifted him up and dropped him into a trash can. And he kind of was able to curl himself around, so his tail was up one end and his head was up the other end. I took him home, and I showed him to my dad and my uncle, And my uncle was really impressed with this alligator, And the alligator was thrashing around in the trash can. And I take a broomstick, and stick it down in there, and he'd grab it with his teeth, and he'd tear pieces of the wood out of the broomstick. He didn't have enough pressure to snap the broomstick, but it was hard to get it out of his mouth. His teeth would slide across the broomstick, and he'd tear the paint off of the broomstick and leave little pieces of wood missing, like off the broomstick. They got pretty strong jaws. So what I did with him is, my dad said, you can't keep him as a pet. And I was like, why not? He's mine. My dad said, no, you can't do that. You can't keep him as a pet, he said. It's going to keep him as a pet. But my uncle said, no, your dad's right. You can't keep him as a pet. We're going to take him down to the river. Let him go. So I went along with him, and we put the trash can in the back seat of the car. It's a big steel trash can. And every once in a while, he'd whack his tail around in that trash can, making off. It'd sound like somebody beating on a pair of cymbals, chang, bang, bang. You hear him in there thumping around like on the way down to the river. So we went down to the river, the St. John's River. We went down to a place called Crow's Bluff. Like a little road that leads down Crow's Bluff and follows the river. We went down that little road for a little ways and followed the river, and we went down toward the edge of the river, and my dad and my uncle carried the trash can down right to the edge of the river, and I went down with them. And they took the lid off the trash can, and they kind of tipped it over sideways, and nothing happened at first. The alligator didn't come out. Then after about a minute, my uncle, he tapped on the back of the trash can. Pop, 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 bang. When he did that, the alligator come springing out of there and went right into that water. And I'm telling you, man, them things can swim. He went down and his tail was going back and forth really fast, and he was moving through that water like a fish. I'm telling you, they can move fast. He went down deep under that brown, greenish colored water. He went down deep, and he disappeared under that water, and I never did see my alligator again. That was the last of that. So that's the age I went through, when I was like 11 years old, and until I was about 12 years old. And then I started my tree climbing phase, when I was I guess I must have been about 12 when I started climbing the trees all the time. I was climbing trees, always looking for the biggest tree I could find, down there in Central Florida. So, anyway, listen, thank you guys for listening, and we'll catch you guys in the very next show. Bye-bye, guys.